have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the white veal sausage to my omelet.
Thank you. In truth, we don't know whether or not that's, her criticism was correct, so that you just, we're a mystery omelet package now?
I mean, I'm vegetarian, so I don't know what white veal sausage tastes like. I never had that before I went vegetarian. Have you ever had white veal sausage?
I had not, but I suppose maybe it's good. I am not a vegetarian.
You ever had veal?
I have not.
Oh. You ever had sausage?
I have had sausage.
I don't know. I don't want to assume.
I was really hoping that I would continue down this rabbit hole of just not having anything. I am
food
a being...
that is white? You ever had an egg before? Well, you agreed with me that it was too obvious to do that, with me today is the Bob to my Mike or the Bob to my Leland. So I was trying to think outside the eggshell, so to speak.
Okay. I don't know. I kind of prefer the eggshell now.
Thank you. And today we're looking at episode 16, also known as Arbitrary Law, written by the Twin Peaks Holy Trinity, Harley Payton, Robert Engels, and Mark Frost.
Now, why do you refer to them as this Holy Trinity?
Because I think outside of David Lynch, as I'm starting to watch the show more and more, these names just keep popping up. Various levels of involvement, but these are three of the major names in the series.
Now, as far as that goes, Kalil, now that the Holy Trinity is all together, is it just three artisans working on a masterful piece all together? Or do you believe that there are too many cooks, 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 too many cooks? I kind of think
of it like I do Starburst. Now, I don't eat Starburst anymore, but when I did, when I was a younger lad and I consumed a Starburst, there are different flavors of Starburst. The colors are not just for decoration. And some of the flavors, you might really, really enjoy. Some of the flavors, maybe not so much. But you definitely don't put all of the Starburst flavors in your mouth at once and start chewing on them. It creates a different experience. And to be honest with you, this particular episode, and I'm not sure if there's other episodes that all three of them work together on, but in this particular episode, I got that Starburst mix in my mouth and I wasn't completely satisfied. This is probably the first episode of our Logcast where I have very mixed feelings on an episode. And I did not expect that going in. I remember this episode well, but I would say that in this in this reviewing of it, I've had some qualms.
Wait. So, how many times have you seen this or the series in general since you corrected yourself there?
I want to say this is my fourth.
Okay. And this is the time when you thought to yourself,
yeah. And I'll expand more on there. And the director for this episode is Tim Hunter. It said that he did a few other episodes. I think he did 3 total. I'm not sure off the top of my head what those other 2 episodes are.
I really like his name, so...
He's the hunter of Tims.
I mean, I think he's Tim the Hunter more than the Hunter of Tim.
I see. So before we get into the relatively, small complaints I have, I think we should just jump right into the real meat on the bone. The real major point of this episode that I think anyone who's watched the episode is listening to this, they want us to talk about this. Let's just get out of the way right away. Most important event. Let's talk about Dick. Let's talk about Dick Tremaine. Let's talk about his sophistication.
Kalil?
Professor?
We don't have to stoop to the levels of Twin Peaks when it comes to innuendos. All right? We don't. We don't. It's okay. We can be bigger than this. We can be bigger than Dick.
That's a pretty big fallacy. Fallacy, am I right? So we get... I wouldn't even say a big chunk. We get a chunk, a morsel, if you will, of Lucy, Andy, and Dick Tremaine drama in this episode. And I don't know which of the 3 writers or the director really thought this was the episode we needed this to happen in. Because tonally, this has nothing to do with anything. But we get the drama continuing and more tension building where Lucy calls the two gentlemen to talk. And she's sitting in the position of where the sheriff or Cooper would be, and she's laying the facts out for these two gents.
That's incorrect. It was Andy who called Dick and got this together.
This is true, because Lucy was worried that he was going to hurt him.
Yes.
Over the phone.
No, it seems that instead he was getting Dick, and they all sat down like adults.
And the poor guy who's trying to fix
Adult is a strong word for Dick. But
the two guys who were the poor guy who was trying to fix the ceiling sprinklers too kept overhearing everything. I think that represents the average viewer who's trying to focus on the main plot but is getting distracted by Lucy.
I mean, you were getting distracted by like what sprinklers were called.
Okay, you know what? It just seems weird to me on a fundamental semantic level that the same thing that you use to water your dog or water your child or water your grass is being used to, save you from a fire.
It is watering the fire.
Imagine
it is
if
still
we called...
doing that. You just insert a new word into it, Kalil.
Okay, but there's severity differences. Like a fire extinguisher, that sounds cool. What does it do? It extinguishes fires. Sprinkler, it just sprinkles a little bit of water on it.
Sprinkles water on it. It does its job, and there are sprinklers shaped like that on your ceiling that go on your lawn, go on your dog, or whatever else you want to put.
It should be called like the sudden tsunami.
The sudden tsunami.
The wonderful wave of water.
Right.
Otherwise known as wow.
Wow. Yeah, no, I agree with the sentiment.
With three W's.
Wow.
And wowing us in this episode was this drama with Lucy, Andy, and Dick Tremaine that was so important that it had to interrupt the stuff with Bob and Leland in the holding situation. In like the climax of tension, we have to cut to Andy and Dick talking to Lucy, how they need to cooperate to make this the best for her.
I think that a little bit of humor helps, if you will.
Was it funny?
I think that the funniest moment was probably just more so Dick Tremaine, who just desperately didn't want to be there, but kind of felt like he needed to, or maybe Andy just is very charismatic to get him there. But in the end, it's just like Lucy's just sitting down with him and saying like, and this child I am keeping, and Dick Tremaine's just off to the side, just gazing into the atmosphere going, oh. Just, oh.
I mean, no, he says, whatever's best for you and your child. It is your baby after all. Like he's
that's the thing.
Considerate.
He says, oh, in response to this child, like there's layers to that oh, and when he makes it clear, like you can test if I'm the father, but this is your child. Mm-hmm. Like putting his like stance down in just very subtle words.
Dick Tremaine stands up for women's rights, women's reproductive rights, her body, her choice. Leave me out of it, Dick Tremaine, 2020.
No, it seems he's pretty heavy-handed on a certain option.
I mean, he gives her the option. He is someone as an ally of women who opens the way for such options.
This joke ends here. This joke ends here. He assumed the option, and he put forward money for it, and that is all. And with his overall demeanor still, after like Lucy standing up for himself and giving him even any time of day, that's just, Dick's a dick. Dick is simply a dick. I don't even want to sarcastically talk about what he is in this greater sense, other than a dick.
I don't feel like I have enough to even comment on him. Like, I get what you're throwing down, and if you want me to drop the sarcasm and jokiness for a moment, I can. I don't want to, but I can. But I just feel like there's not enough in this situation for me to really care about any of the points of view here. We have the residue from like 5 episodes ago when Dick Tremaine first was giving the money. I don't even know if it was 5, maybe it was more. But this is a plot line that just hasn't had anything really invested in it ever since. We had Gwen last time. Do you want me to bring up Gwen again, Professor?
I don't.
Lest I remind you?
No, thankfully this episode has mercy for us on that.
I sometimes think in the plot lines that get criticized by detractors of season 2, I think sometimes there's plot lines that are overly criticized and some that are, pretty fairly critiqued. And I would say that at this moment in time, as much as I do enjoy the humor of Dick Tremaine, I think that this was not the episode to do this in.
Okay.
I think that it just doesn't work with the tone.
I think that it works more in the tone of Twin Peaks than this episode. This episode already was strange enough.
The only reason this is here on a logical way is so that Dick Tremaine can smoke, so the smoke can go up and affect the sprinklers, as you people call them.
I think that the logic is that this show still has its feel in soap operas, and this is an element of soap opera that has remained amongst the chaos and strangeness of, well, everything else.
See, and that's where I'm not quite sure how I feel, because this show kind of feels like it's having an identity crisis. And normally, I mentioned the clever Starburst analogy earlier. Normally, these flavors blend in a way where I like the combination of murder mystery, surrealist nightmare, comedy, soap opera, everything going on. But this episode, I feel like, wants to be the last episode, which was brilliant, where we had the stuff with Leland and the golf situation and all the different elements of chemistry that were happening between us, the viewer who knows things, and the characters who don't know things, and the double crossing that was going on with Leland and Bob. But this episode feels tonally not as concise. Say what I will, or say what you will about David Lynch's episodes, they are very, very hard on their tone. And when Lynch does humor, it veers very strongly. And these are all subjective terms, but for me, the soap opera-y elements, at least what I consider the soap opera elements, and the humor in here did not land. I just did not think it worked.
This episode, the best way I can describe it, I feel that it's like a piece, it's like the pieces of paper, the establishment of Twin Peaks, like with everything with Laura Palmer, like the realization that Leland is the killer, just like a lot of elements being a piece of paper, being crumpled up, tossed away, and starting on a new blank sheet. And I'm a bit mixed on that.
See,
if on one hand, this episode comes off as a bit spiteful in an entertaining way. I know that beforehand, Kalil, you made the comment that David Lynch did not want to reveal the murderer.
Yes.
And I don't know how much other people may have felt the same way.
Well, the Log Lady certainly seems to feel that way,
yes.
Which she is conveniently written by David Lynch. We've talked about before that the Log Lady intros were made after the show ended by Lynch.
Yeah.
So when she's talking, you made the comment right away, we were watching it, that this just sounds like David Lynch talking to us.
Yep.
And it is.
Yep.
She said, or Lynch said almost, there is a depression after an answer is given. It was almost fun not knowing. Yes, now we know. At least we know what we saw in the beginning. But there's still the question, why? And this question will go on and on until the final answer comes. Then the knowing is so full, there's no room for questions. And to be completely honest, I want to be clear here that my mixed feelings, and I don't know if I don't want to speak for you, but I know my mixed feelings are not because the question was answered. My depression about this episode, to use her words, is not because I was given an answer, but because I think this episode was rushed. And I personally, again, I think the episodes, the two before this, which gave us the answer, I think those were some of the best we've ever seen.
I think that, in truth, not only were those episodes great, there was a lot of excitement I had for Leland. As I wanted
Say goodbye.
Say goodbye. I wanted to see how the actor could handle the extremes as well as subtleties and play with the tone with a killer in the background. I think that there was genuine potential throwing the answer in the air, but also just keeping it a mystery towards our cast members as effectively Bob goes about. And that still can go about, but I think that Leland was the perfect actor for this, especially with the performance in the last few episodes and the overall madness that he'd gone through the first season.
One of the ways that the Lynch loyalists, and I'm sometimes one of them, like to put it is that revealing the killer of Laura Palmer was killing the golden goose. And I would add a twist to that idea in the sense that I think getting rid of Leland was killing the golden goose, at least when and how they did it here. I agree with you completely. And upon retrospect, because when I first watched the show, I just enjoyed the episode. And if you listeners sincerely just enjoy this episode, great. We're not here to tell you you're wrong for your opinion. But for me, I really have looked back on this episode thinking that they had an excellent idea here, that the first part of the show, the first, 13 episodes of this show We did not know the killer. The mystery was who killed Laura Palmer. The dynamic shifted now that we know the answer, but Cooper does not. The sheriff does not. And that idea that we know what's going on with Leland, but no one else does, it creates a menace to Leland because we know something they don't. And the best you get of that in this episode, just to jump ahead a bit, I think is Leland and Donna in this episode.
Yes.
That kind of moment was excellent, but now it can't happen anymore. They got rid of Leland. And I think that this could have, and I don't want to stretch it out forever, obviously, but I think only 2 episodes of Leland like this, we could have had this go on for an arc.
Yeah.
And while other things are happening, with Pete, with MT Wentz and with Jean Renault and whatever's going on with Wyndham Earl, all that stuff in the background, we could have Leland where we know what's going on and they don't.
Yeah. And with not to mention that it seemed like when you were saying that things were rushed, a lot of things were thrown at us all at once.
Yes,
with the
here's
gum
the answers. Take
and
it.
the dancing and the letters. This thing was just a bit too spelled out for my liking.
Too much cream corn.
But on the other hand, it still does play up more of the strangeness, the unknown horror element in the owls about Twin Peaks.
Yes.
The history of Cooper and Bob being brought up, etc. And the fact is that though we do lose Leland, Bob still lurks out there and could find a new child, a new son of Robert, if you will. And we'll go back to the drawing board.
And to use my Garmin Bosia creamed corn idea from earlier, I would say that amidst all of this, there is a kernel of good ideas.
Yeah.
There are several kernels of good ideas in here. I'm also a fan and sometimes of letting the audience figure some things out for themselves. So not only were all the answers where Cooper just starts listing all the evidence that would show Leland's the killer, not only does he list it so quickly, I also think that even if he had taken his time, I don't know if I want it just told to me. To be completely honest with you.
I think that this episode just generally, especially when you add the log lady intro, felt spiteful.
Yeah.
And there was a scene, like only one scene, there's nothing expanded upon on Vivian and Norma other than things that we've seen before. Vivian critiquing Norma getting frustrated with her mother. That's mainly it. But it's the substance of it, really. Vivian effectively is pretty frustrated at the current omelet that they have. And she suggests throwing a few ingredients, if you will. And Norma kind of says sarcastically that she'll start looking for the mushrooms, if you will. Now, it seems strange alone, but if you consider it in the spiteful tone of this episode, it could be a dialogue of people's discontent and consideration of adding ingredients for something that seems out of place or a burden on those around them.
Too many cooks.
Maybe too many cooks, but overall, just maybe the pressures of people on the outside just being angry and saying, no, you gotta do this, gotta do that. And just a frustration taking the side of Norma and just saying that, yeah, no, this is my place, this is my restaurant, this is my food. And Vivian doesn't really need to critique Toad's favorite restaurant by adding these extra ingredients.
Poor Toad.
I think. But at the same time, it could also be Vivian's side, if someone were to take it, if you will, saying, no, these elements would be important to make a perfect dish. But and taking that side, saying, these are important for this dish, we can't take them out. Meanwhile, just kind of like the very passe, yeah, sure, we'll go along and do that and roll your eyes. Someone could say that Norma is actually the executive position. Either way it's read, it just seems to carry on that spiteful tone.
I think it is a really interesting scene, and to be honest, before you had, insisted that this be something we talk about along with tone, I hadn't really considered it as anything more than a one-off, moment. But whether intentional or not, if we take this episode as a cohesive whole, if we try to articulate there are reasons behind the things included, I do think it's interesting that what you're pointing out, that this scene is all about criticism instead of appreciation. And whether or not, because I don't know where the cynicism is coming from, if it is intentional, because Lynch, for all we know, didn't have a direct hand in this episode, unlike how he did a couple episodes back with the killer reveal. But we have 3 writers and a director here, I don't know which one of them or all of them is feeling this. I don't know if one of the, either Norma or Vivian represents the ABC executives, if they represent the audience. You can, articulate it however you want. But whoever is involved with this, we're not being served something we're fully satisfied with. But if we critique it, that also comes across as a bit wanting your cake and eating it too.
Yeah, which is why I'm just curious myself, beyond like David Lynch, who else was dissatisfied with this? So...
And this early into season 2, because it gets more complicated later for that opinion.
Okay.
But this early on, I don't know how much discontent there was. The biggest amount of pressure was whether to reveal the killer or not. And they're in the midst of the afterfall of revealing the killer. I'm curious that already there's so much stress. And not to read into it too much, though, because I do think... We talked about the situation with Dick Tremaine and Lucy and Andy. Would you apply that same sort of like thematic lens on that? Like, what's that about? Does that have a reason?
That's I would imagine, just find a place to progress the plot of those individuals.
Well, I guess it could be. Okay, now we're getting listeners. We know we're doing the thing of overanalyzing. We're just doing this.
Yeah.
It is a question of whose baby is it? Whose creation is this?
Yeah.
Who does it belong to?
Oh.
And you have 3 parties talking about the question of who does it belong to. Those could be the 3 writers, but it could also be the audience is one of those, the directors and writers are one of those, and the ABC executives are one of those. And they're trying to figure out who has custody over Twin Peaks.
Or you could even just say, like, Lucy is Twin Peaks, and effectively it's like, okay, we have to check both your blood and see who the baby belonged to. And that kind of makes me afraid.
I get it. An omelet is an egg. What is an egg? A fetus. It's the fertilized egg, right?
Okay.
So, Twin Peaks is an egg in 2 different ways.
Well, audience... It was a long time coming, but finally I can pass the tinfoil hat onto my co-host Kalil. Kalil, congratulations. I hope that you wear it well.
Toad for president. And then again, it's not all bad. I want to cycle around to our criticism again at the end, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Because I think once we've gone over our individual thoughts on the actual main storyline, ignoring our joking about Dick Tremaine, I think we can then come to terms more with what we did or did not like.
Okay.
So one thing I think was pretty good, and we both reacted well, was the return of Albert Rosenfeld.
I didn't.
You didn't like him being there?
The thing is that doesn't feel like Rosenfeld.
Okay,
Rosenfeld's
I
here.
That.
He returns, but this Rosenfeld has far less bite than we have ever seen.
You know what? You're right.
He just straight out trusts Cooper with his methods, and for the most part, he's just standing aside just for exposition whenever the need comes up. And as a changed Rosenfeld fan myself, as someone who started at the beginning kind of being iffy, but then growing fond of this person, it's just...
He's been declawed.
Off.
He's been declawed, yeah.
And Rosenfeld's perspective always seemed to be a breath of fresh air amongst people that we would be very familiar with. He's very critical. He is quick to strike, but no, he's just an exposition gnome.
Yeah, I mean, he flat out just says, like, in case anyone was concerned, that Maddie's killer is Leland's killer. He's there to articulate that idea.
Here's the blood types.
Yeah, here's the blood types. We found the white fox fur. He just kind of gives information, and he tells Cooper that he's the only one with the coordinates to, like, go on this vision quest and solve the problem. And he kind of just, like, gives the hero his task.
And it's so strange because those lines sound far more fitting for someone like Briggs, who has been featured in this episode.
Yeah.
But his job goes around with coordinates in space and so on.
Well, I'd also say that Truman was neutered, too. Because you latched on a couple episodes ago to the comment Truman made that he was done with all this mumbo-jumbo.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem very done. The most we get out of it is that he's having trouble believing. But he is going with it 100%. Any sentiments he had even just a couple days ago in Twin Peaks time are already gone.
Yeah.
Because it's only been like 2 days or less than 2 days, and he is 100% backing Cooper and everything. He's told by Cooper whispering in his ear, actually, it's Leland, it's not Ben. And Truman just goes with it, even after before being so convinced that Cooper was wrong.
This episode... It's like that point, like, we've seen comparisons with dreams. We've been talking about dreams. This is the point of the dream in which I'm like, what the hell is going on here?
Freud, help me interpret. Yeah, it is really, really strange. It is really, really strange. And as if this episode... I thought we were being positive. I thought this was the positive.
This is positive.
What else is positive? Donna and James are here. That's positive, right? Okay, there are some good moments. There are some good moments here because they have an extraordinarily large presence in this episode.
They do.
And I don't know if I like or dislike that. I mean, I get it because they're connected to Maddie and they're connected to Laura, and it makes sense in some regards that they would be relevant in that sense.
Yeah.
But they're just kind of like here to push forward the story in their own way as well. So we see them first in the darkest known corner of the Double R Diner.
God, like the lighting was horrible. Like we were taking, like, we're going to go forward with this, but we're taking our time just trying to work out a small detail.
On the ring, yeah.
But we're like, okay, where is this? Well, it's the weird red tablecloth that we decided would be best for this food critic.
MT Wentz, yep.
And there's like ketchup balls in the background, so this is clearly the Double R.
Yeah.
Are they there at night? Are they having a slumber party with Hank and Toad? What's going on?
Clearly it's daylight outside, and then we're given indication in a later scene when Andy is over there chanting his new mantra of Je un homme solitaire. They hear that, and you see Donna come from like camera left to Andy, meaning that where Andy's perfectly lit. Like, Andy is in the normal lighting of the Double R Diner, meaning that there is just a corner of the Double R for vampires.
Yeah, specifically for teenage drama and vampires, which thankfully goes along well with one another.
You know, now that we're saying it, it makes perfect thematic sense.
But yeah, while we're over here, I know we're going to go back to James and Donna because that's a big part. But is Andy allowed to be chanting such confidential information? Like, it's like, again, he even outright says it was inside the suicide note, and he's just eating his food, just chanting out this French phrase.
Andy is very, very trusting.
Yeah.
At least in this episode. I would also argue in characters whose interpretations have slightly altered, his is not as dramatic of a shift as Albert, but I think Andy's gone through different permutations too, where he has gotten rapidly less competent recently. And he was already kind of like known as the crybaby from episode 1, the pilot 1. But he was a good, like, remember when the shot with John Renault, he is a dead shot. He is actually very reliable as a man in the job. Ever since like season 2 started and the whole Lucy affair happened, I don't think he's had one moment of positive impact because Hawk's doing all the criminal law enforcement in the entire town.
I don't know. There still is some personal stuff in this very episode. Like I said, Andy is the one to call out Dick Tremaine and say, we need to talk. That is a very competent and adult thing. And
for the case of Laura Palmer, yes.
In the
it's not relevant
case of
to
Andy
anything.
in general, okay?
Yeah, I know. I'm just, again, I'm being negative. So James gave Donna this ring, which we couldn't see. It looked like it was maybe a green gemstone in the center.
After they enjoyed last night so much.
Yeah. Considering how much rings seem to be important, thought I would try to figure out what ring it is, but it's too dark in that corner. And we heard James making this odd commentary that the engine sounded like 1,000 people singing. And then he said, what were they singing about? What do you think? Last night.
Sure, buddy.
They must have had a fun game of Monopoly last night or something.
I think that there's like you know those Mad Libs, like you fill in the words. I'm pretty sure there's a poetry version of that James filled out before going into the Double R, or just in general with some of these lines.
Yeah, and then you know, Donna again, she's being used in the storyline as a device. She overhears Andy's Je un homme solitaire. She realizes in that moment, oh, that was in the suicide note. Thank you for the confidential information. I got to go tell Cooper immediately to go check out this house owned by this person named Mrs. Tremond and her weird grandson who transports corn with his mind.
Thank you, Andy.
And they go there, and instead of the normal Mrs. Tremond, we get a mysterious new Mrs. Tremond.
Yeah.
Who apparently, you know, Donna's never met before. There's just someone else in the house.
She seems sassy.
She does seem pretty sassy, but also pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Because once she realizes it's Donna, she remembered that, you know, the day where Harold had died, she got this note in the mail that was in Harold's handwriting that Donna reads, and it's a page from Laura's secret diary.
But that's the thing also, like, there's a woman who's been waiting for Meals on Wheels. How has this woman been getting food? Like, when she does enter the room, does the food just suddenly appear on, like, the side?
Maybe she doesn't need Meals on Wheels. Am I understanding your comment correctly?
Like, somehow, they were ordered, like, the meals were ordered and delivered to this house. What happened? Like, does the meal go into this untangible space? Does this woman actually order her meals and just nothing happens? Like, she doesn't get any food?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Because, okay, the only way I can offer an explanation is that the moment that they went to this house was the first moment, basically, where this new person moved in, and that every other day up to this point, it has been the real Mrs. Tremond.
Where does the food go?
But since Donna is on the same route as Laura's old route... Okay, here, maybe the assumption is that Donna quit doing Meals and Wheels a while ago, some new person joined in, and maybe they saw the new Mrs. Tremond a few days ago, canceled her subscription. Maybe it doesn't matter, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe the meals just drove off on their wheels.
I'm concerned that Mrs. Tremond has been eating lately, okay?
I'm concerned Mrs. Tremond may have been eaten lately. We don't know what happened to this woman.
Apparently her mother is dead, and it may be
For 3
assumed
years.
that it may be something of a remnant of her mother, maybe, but that's super speculation there.
Super speculation. What's not super speculation are the contents of this letter, because they are immediately read to us by Donna herself. Laura starts to describe in clear details the dream that Cooper had in episode 2, also in the international pilot. And she clarifies that Bob is only afraid of one man. He told me once, a man named Mike. I wonder if this was Mike in my dream. And then a rapid zoom in on Donna's lips for some of that sweet Donna lip fan service. And then she says next day she's going to die. Got to keep Bob away from her. Got to tear him out from inside. She just starts like quoting 9 Inch Nails lyrics, I think. And then Andy takes Donna home. And then Donna proceeds to not stay home. Because Donna got to move. What'd you think of this part, Professor? Are you being like releasing the spirit of Bob that was within you?
I am releasing some sort of spirit. Here's a lot of things.
Because it gets worse.
A lot of things get revealed, especially along the Laura Palmer route.
Yeah.
I feel like there still is some mystery here that not all the answers are explained.
Right.
Even though the intro made it seem like that might be the case, like there would be no questions left. I got questions. Laura has been set up, whether it be primarily noted as men, but we can also argue some women, including Donna, as a very manipulative force.
Yes.
Now, you could say that her purest thoughts might be within her diary. I have no idea what to think or speculate on her final note. And that note was over, like, she said that she would die that night.
Yes.
Whether or not...
And Bob seems to corroborate this later. that she was trying to... Or Leland says, basically, that he was put in a situation where he either had to give Laura to Bob, or he'd have to kill Laura. And there seems to be this idea that Laura was struggling in some ways with Bob.
Yeah. There is still a pinky left to hold onto Maddie, if you will. My Laura Palmer Maddie.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. I never heard a pinky. Is that a saying?
Like, imagine, like, holding onto a cliff face, but only by a pinky. Like, I'm still holding on, but barely by the force of my pinky.
Yeah.
One way or another, in a Laura wig or not, Laura is dead. But with the note of the struggle, how much was she fighting, trying to fend them off? She already was speaking of her darker side, but it seems that from the commentary, she was apparently really good at fighting off the spirits, far better than Leland, if you will. But still, this manipulation, this darkness is still evident with Laura.
Right.
I do not know the full extent of these truths, of Laura's secrets, of her death, whether it be literal or metaphorical. One way or another, she is dead. But...
Allegedly.
But I still feel that there is grounding in the Laura Maddie matter.
Sure. To get more information about that situation, perhaps, Donna instead of staying home after Andy presumably took her there, she just does a hard left turn and goes over to the Palmer household because she urgently needs to deliver Leland Palmer the tape of Just You.
Oh boy.
And she's wearing her sunglasses and she's smoking her cigarettes. She's back to bad, Donna. We haven't seen her in a little while.
Yeah.
And she wants Leland to mail the Just You tape to Maddie.
Okay.
And Leland says, that's not going to be a problem at all.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a problem at all. And Leland just stares at her. And he's, I know those glasses from somewhere. And she says, yeah, they were Laura's. Maddie gave them to me. And Leland just kind of walks away, and he's just like visually conflicted. He, you mentioned before the kind of that wrestling with Bob internally. That seems to be happening here.
Yeah.
Something akin to that.
Yeah.
And it's so obviously suspicious as Donna's just taking a drag off her cigarette. And Leland gets a phone call. Right after actually, Donna starts talking about the secret diary that Leland clearly did not know existed. Mm-hmm. And he gets the phone call. He comes back after leering dangerously close to Donna. Again, she doesn't seem to register any concern when Laura's father's just like a centimeter from her, just overtowering her. Mm-hmm. We get the call, and it's from Beth, Maddie's mother. And I'm not really sure. I don't know if any of the supplementary material ever confirms it. I'm actually curious if Beth is Leland's sister or Sarah's. Yeah. I don't know which side of the family it is. Yeah. I have a feeling that it's probably Sarah's side, but I don't really know that. I'd be curious. But he finds out, Maddie never made it home. Okay. But he tells, Donna not to worry about a thing. He starts chewing on his gum. Says he's going to get them lemonade. And he goes to the mirror, and Bob is chewing that gum open
he is
mouthed.
Going to town.
Super rude. Rude manners.
It looks almost like he's disgusted by the gum.
Yeah. I mean, it's Leland's favorite. Never said it was Bob's favorite. Let's not make assumptions here, guys. Mm-hmm. And he returns with the orange lemonade that Donna requested.
The classic orange lemonade coming from classic orange lemons of Twin Peaks.
Freshly squeezed from the oranges.
Lemons.
And he says, hey, I know the cure for what ails you. It's the same thing that always makes me feel good. And he starts playing that record with the piano song.
Which by the way, two things with that.
Two things.
One, I kind of appreciate this final, this is nearly like the final, mysterious Killer Bob moment.
Yes.
And not only is it orange lemonade, which is a little off.
Yes, I think just a little off.
Yeah, I think that little off is just the perfect way to describe this person. Mm-hmm. And we're listening to the record. There's a connection I didn't realize beforehand. That every time that we get towards the end of a record, we even get a little close-up on the pin and needle. That's around the time Bob comes through.
Yes.
It seems that it's kind of a trademark, if you will. Whether it is just more so something that is really close to Leland and it's an exploitation of Bob, or if maybe in the future this might be a call sign to look out for, if you will. I, at the very least, appreciate the small detail from the never-ending record back in Jacques' cabin to...
I was going to bring that up if you didn't. Good job.
Thank you. As well as the two times inside of the Palmer household.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that detail.
And at first, Donna finds these dances kind of humorous. Oh, silly Leland and his dancing.
Yeah.
But then the dancing starts to take on different connotations as he violently is grabbing her. And in the middle of the presumable daytime, it starts lightning flashes outside.
It's just lightning everywhere today.
Lightning everywhere. But actually, look out the windows. It's so blindingly white that you're not really sure what time of day it is. And he just keeps dancing and dancing and dancing until eventually the doorbell rings. He releases Donna, says, stay right there, and he goes over to the door. And by this time, she does obviously realize, because she's breathing heavily, but she still stays there. While Leland talks to Harry at the door, and Sheriff Truman, tells him that they need to leave. And he goes with him, leaving Donna just in the living room.
Yep.
Just hoping Donna would stay there.
There's tears straight up in her eyes as well, so she is just very frightened.
I do think it's interesting to think about how Bob is portrayed as an entity in this episode, because we've talked a little bit about before about whether what Bob is doing is thought out and logical, like with the whole golf club thing with Cooper,
Yeah.
or if he's just operating in the moment. I think this gives credence to the idea that it's operating in the moment because clearly after what happened with Donna, she's kind of a loose thread.
Okay.
Like Donna should know something's wrong, but he didn't really close up that loose thread. Like she just is there aware that something's wrong with him, but he has no way to silence her in that moment. And he just kind of like leaves her there in his living room, you know, where she could just search the house, or maybe even just like she could escape and tell people what's going on.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't really seem like she does. She doesn't really seem to actually like warn anyone, which I find curious. You think after an event like that happens, you would tell someone.
Yeah.
Because that's obviously very disturbing. But Leland just seems to not, or at least Bob, I should say, doesn't really seem to take Donna and the situation as a threat. Like once he's leaving the room, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for that. It was fun in the moment, but the moment's passed. I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
With no thought of the repercussions of Donna knowing more information. So we then see Donna in a scene later on, walking down the road, sitting at the bench.
Making my way downtown.
Making my way downtown. James is moving fast down the highway. Yeah. And James joins her. And Donna tells him that Maddie died. It's the same killer. Again, we got to be repeated to the viewer that it's the same killer.
You know what? Go ahead.
Just to stamp out your concern that maybe it's not the same killer.
You know, I'm going to let you go ahead and just describe this whole conversation to the best of your ability, because I was busy screaming at the television. So please, go on.
I mean, it's a really hard piece of literature to simply explain, because
it's also hard to digest.
It's very... trying to... Okay,
it's
I want to be sarcastic.
Rocks.
I want to be sarcastic.
I'm not being sarcastic.
It's bad. So just think, there's moments where I've questioned early on, like James and Donna's reactions, like even in the pilot, that their best friend just died. Like Donna's childhood best friend and James's girlfriend had just died, and the day they basically find out she died, they're making out in the woods with each other. I question that impulsiveness, but I also understand that, you know, they're teenagers, they're both very emotional. Maybe, you know, they just got the better of themselves. They were finding comfort the only way they knew how. It does not make that at all a good thing, but I'm like, maybe. But as the show went on, James and Donna just did increasingly bizarre things.
Yeah.
And this probably is the weirdest series of events they've ever had. And that's saying something for these guys.
Yeah.
Because it goes from the reaction of, you know, Maddie's dead. She was killed by the same person who killed Laura. And you're thinking, okay, how's James going to react to this? He was obviously very close to Maddie. He blurred the lines between Maddie and Laura in his own head. How's he going to react to this news? Because when he found out Laura was dead, or at least when he figured out that was likely the case, he was sitting in the classroom snapping his pencil, and it looked like his forehead was about to explode from the veins in his head.
Yep.
Here, he just kind of does a light little sigh. Like, you found out your kid, like, skipped to class today or something to go play hooky. It's like, just a little sigh. And then he's like, hey, we could have helped her.
How?
We could have helped. We could have helped her. He just keeps repeating that we could have helped her.
Yeah. And then we get how twice.
And then...
But it goes more in my tone because...
Yeah.
What the hell are you talking about, James?
And then James says, this is no good. And okay, I understand. That's the first logical thing he said in response, because you're right. Your friend dying is no good. And then Donna, in a moment of just visceral clarity, you mean us?
What?
Donna, what are you talking about? You just said your friend died.
Yeah.
But James, instead of call her out on that, like, why are you talking about a relationship when our friend just died?
No, it seems they're on the same page here.
No, they're on the same wavelength. He's like, it doesn't matter. Don't you see? Nothing we do matters. Nothing's ever going to change. It doesn't matter if we're happy and the rest of the world goes to hell. And then he just like turns to go on his motorcycle. You know, he's going to leave. James, don't leave. James, don't leave me. And then I just wrote in my notes, Donna cry. Donna cry.
You should also put Professor cry.
Professor cry.
There we go.
If I had tears left, I would cry. It's, you know, and again, whether intentional or not, I can find humor in this. That is the only silver lining this offers me, is humor. But I have to look extra hard for it sometimes.
I've got to scream really hard to find the humor. I have to get to hysteria before I get to humor at this point. James and Donna, the only silver lining I see from this is that they're apart again. The best things we get from James and Donna, in my eyes, is when they are not in this relationship.
I am really curious.
In the barest terms.
Listeners who know where the show is headed in the future, you know what I'm curious about regarding James and Donna and their distance from each other very soon. I won't say anymore.
I can't wait to get to the Alaska arc of Twin Peaks.
Close enough. I don't know, man. I just there's different ways to look at it. Does it fit their characters? I don't know. They're stupid, I guess. But even for James and Donna, this is an absurd level of unrealism where instead of getting a genuine reaction about Maddie dying, they do a sigh and then they immediately pivot into talking about a less important subject, and really a subject that shouldn't be the topic right now. And considering we just got recently some conversations on that between the two, like when we had James come in and rescue them kind of from Harold's place, we already had a moment of kind of reconnecting between the two. The fact that Maddie's death is given a sigh and then they immediately pivot into talking about their relationship, it goes beyond just they're reckless teenagers and they're too emotional or whatever else. Honestly, it's an insult to teenagers. These characters are incredibly unsympathetic. I can't imagine being so callous that someone who was close to you just got murdered and you think about it for 5 seconds.
They have not been sympathetic for a while. I mean, in the end, worst, with Donna's relationship with Harold, which, again, far more interesting, she was still willing to quickly betray when it came down to information on her friend Laura. Meanwhile, James is very violent from what we can see at moments of confusion. Mm-hmm. He is willing to break down Leland's very nice end table over his own personal frustrations and chase Donna outside in a fit of rage. These are...
Not cool, James. Not cool.
These are not really good or healthy people.
Yeah. And again, I guess I really haven't said as much because I wanted to keep it open to interpretation. But now that we've kind of moved past a lot of the Harold stuff, I think we can safely say now that he's been dead for a few episodes, I can maybe say a few more things. I do blame Donna for a lot of what happened to Harold. I ultimately view Harold as a victim in that situation where Donna just shoot him up and spit him out. And there's a sense in which I kind of understand, again, characters to be good don't have to be morally good or even likable necessarily as people.
Yeah.
But what Donna does with Harold and just really anyone around her, she's so, and James is the same way. It's not just her. So unaware of how their actions have consequences that it is baffling. And considering how much, because even just a few episodes ago, James was making the point to Donna that we can't just forget about what we're doing. It could hurt someone. He even tried to basically, was it him or Maddie? I can't remember. Trying to reconcile with Donna that no, this is a concern, what happened to Harold, but they just keep pushing away their guilt or running away from it. And I understand why James is saying that none of this matters because he feels like he's powerless. And I get that. I understand that. This would have been a fine conversation. Okay, not really fine. It would have been a palatable conversation 3 episodes from now when they get over the death. But when he just found out, I don't know. I don't buy it.
Yeah. A lot of things are just quick here.
Hey, listeners, if this is your first time listening to one of our podcast episodes, this is not normally how we are.
No.
I literally got done with the last podcast and I was like, Professor, I was really energized that last night. I was really feeling it. I was kind of peppy.
Yeah.
I had some good energy going. Probably.
Yeah, this time, we're saying we're feeling mixed, but the thing is the mix is
it's a mix in hell.
We are putting into the blender, stuff that has clearly expired for a while, shoelace that we found on the street.
The silver lining is the top layer of Dante's Inferno. It's bad when layer 1 of hell is it's not all that bad.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy and Dick Tremaine and Andy are trying to work things out. That's okay.
So I guess let's just hard pivot directly into the real meat of here. We have James and Donna kind of as plot devices to further the real drive of this episode, which is everything with Bob, Mike, Leland, and the spiritual forces at work in this town and within Cooper. We get Cooper wanting to talk to Mike. Doc Hayward basically saying, look, we got to give this guy his meds. He's going to die soon. And Cooper pretty much ignoring that, seeing the needs of the investigation override any health concerns of this man. And again, where is Truman, who a few episodes ago was the one urgently saying we have to give him the meds? that was a one-off comment, I guess, because Truman hasn't had any concern about this guy ever since. Mike, who is a very sweaty boy, starts describing how Mike and Bob, when they were killing, they had this perfect relationship. This is what the kids call goals. Relationship goals. And you know what those goals are? Appetite, satisfaction, a golden circle. You got those three things? You know what they call that? The kids call that bay. The kids call that bay.
It's hard to ignore that, but attempting to ignore
Bob,
that.
more like babe.
What do you interpret golden circle? Because the two at the start seem fair enough, if you will.
I think there are things that happen later that recontextualize this comment, so I don't want to say too much.
Okay.
There are a few other circles that appear related to Bob. I'll say this for those who...
Because right now, when I'm thinking like the golden circle, and we do mention a ring, but now I'm thinking like a golden ring, if you will.
Yeah.
Like it has been forged, and there was like this...
Which is not clear if Cooper's ring is that ring.
There is Frodo and Samwise relationship that both Bob and Mike had journeying off into the Shire.
Yeah. The other... So there's the rings, and there's also, for those who know ahead, I believe it's Glastonbury Grove, there is a certain circle that involves the Red Room. And if you know the show, you know what I'm talking about for future. I don't. Again, that's why I didn't spoil anything. You don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, I now know Red Room, so something.
You know there's a Red Room already.
I know, but I don't know that there was any colors beyond black, white, and red.
There's a geometric shape involved with a room we've already seen. We've seen the Red Room. That's the curtain room.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't spoil anything.
Now I'm looking at the Red Room.
What are you talking about?
I could have looked anywhere else, but now I'm looking at the Red Room.
No, I didn't even say it was in the room. It says it's affiliated with the Red Room. Okay, anyway, moving on.
Red Room adjacent.
Red Room adjacent. And Cooper, starts saying he gave his ring to the giant. Mike says that the giant is known to them. The giant can help him find Bob, but instead of spelling it out, he just says the answer, is not here, pointing to the head. It's here, pointing to the heart. Which, I don't know how many times you've seen that in media, where it's like they point to the head versus the heart thing. Mm-hmm. That feels like one of the most cliched things ever in Twin Peaks. I have a feeling that was cliched even in 1991.
I like to think that it's somewhere else. Like, instead of the heart,
it's
lungs. It's in your rib. You have to give up your rib to make a new Laura Palmer.
Yeah, it's kind of like how Adam had to remove the rib to make Eve.
You got the reference, yay!
Yay! And Cooper goes out of the room. Mike's doing fine. He might be dying. And he leaves the room, and we see the milkman, Senior Drool Cup.
Yep.
He feels like he's obligated to be in this episode.
No, it like I said, Senior Drool Cup seems to be somewhat related to the giant. Mm-hmm. It seems that we cannot have one without the other.
Right. And again, he knows about him. The milk will cool down on you, but it's getting warmer now. Cool.
What does that even mean?
I mean, is it this? The obvious is that it's the investigation.
Yeah.
That's, and the sad part is that that's just what it is, right? It's so surface level.
Yeah, but the thing is that it's like setting up a sense of anticipation, but most of the stuff is already getting payoff. Ready. There's no payoff.
It's set up for things you're going to find out in 10 minutes.
Not to mention, let's say this is an average conversation, it's supposed to be some sort of coincidental, if you will. Putting my mind aside and thinking yeah, maybe he's just saying this in casual conversation could be reinterpreted. What does that mean, milkman? Yeah. What is in the milk?
What's in the lemonade is, I think, more pressing from Leland's angle. Then later in the episode, we get the Avengers assembling over at the Roadhouse, the Big Bang Bar. Not Leland. Well, Leland. Cooper assembles everyone he thinks could be associated with the killer. He grabs Ben, who's cracking nuts off on the booth.
So that's what he's doing?
Cracking nuts, yeah.
No, not Ben, Cooper, because this was a weird scene.
It is a really weird scene.
In the Roadhouse.
He's getting Ben, he's getting Leland, he's getting Leo, and he's getting Bobby. And Bobby says, give yourself a raise, Hawk, which I know he's being sarcastic, but yes, Hawk deserves a raise.
He's doing all the freaking work.
Hawk should be the sheriff right now. And nothing against Truman, but doing the work.
In some extent, you could also say that he's bringing Hawk, so.
Yeah. So the thing that's weird about this scene is it kind of reminds me of what was going on in the Much Better scene where Philip Gerard / Mike was in the lobby of the Great Northern trying to sniff out Bob. But instead of having how Philip Gerard, Mike was there to use as a way to find Bob, Cooper just kind of brings them here with the blind faith that somehow it's just gonna happen.
Like, and we're just gonna bring up the last two people also. Like, there's also Briggs, and there's also Senior Drool Cup.
And Ed.
And Ed. Ed is also there.
Because he's a bookhouse boy.
Which
is really easy to forget about because that hasn't been used very well in this show so far.
Yeah, it hasn't
despite being set up really, really interestingly, we haven't heard much about them.
Yeah, again, you say that there's no questions left remaining. I still got a lot of questions here. What happened to the Bookhouse Boys?
Yeah.
But there's all these people being set up with Cooper, but there is no setup for this. I mean,
no.
And the Giant has been seen here once. At the very least, at the hotel he's been seen twice.
When Cooper threw rocks at bottles in the forest, this made more sense.
Like, if anything, it's just to help shoot the scene, I guess.
It's so obvious, and this is what's, again, we both really enjoy Twin Peaks. We have spent the last 15 or so episodes really enjoying this show. Well, I know that, Professor, you said every episode gets better and better and better.
Yes.
This might be the first time that's not the case.
This is the balance board on whatever they do next is going to heavily influence this episode.
Would you say that up till now, every episode's gotten better?
Yes.
Until here?
Yes.
So when we're being this negative, we want to be clear that we really enjoy the show.
Yeah, I love it.
And part of enjoying a show for us is being able to recognize its flaws and partly to enjoy the things it does right even more. Where Twin Peaks fails here, it has succeeded in other places spectacularly. And other scenes that are weird, silly, seemingly nonsensical have been great. I mentioned the rock throwing at the bottles. I think that's a great scene. It's nonsense, but it's a lot of fun, and it does make a form of dream logic sense. This does not. This is literally so transparently a plot device. We need to reveal the killer. How are we going to do it? Cooper needs to find out. Let's just put everyone in the room where the Giant appeared last time, and he'll just find out. He'll just get told.
We made the comment before, with especially Lynch enjoying things such as Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
We were just thinking in this moment, it was like, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there. And that was literally the commentary we had while watching the episode.
And it's really sad because if you think about it, again, I mentioned how good it was, the way Ben was taken down after all the kind of the setup with Ben as a character, how swiftly he fell, and the way that circumstance worked out, just a beautiful payoff. Even in this episode, we get a little bit of that with Catherine. But for Leland, we just found out how vile Leland is with Bob. Yeah. We just got that. And I don't think either of us, maybe viewers at the time, I don't think either of us felt a nagging sensation that he had to get removed from the show. Mm-hmm. In fact, if anything, we thought Leland was the next interesting drive of the show.
Now, mind you, getting rid of Leland, I guess, I was questioning before, like, if Bob can control people, can he control more than one person?
Right.
Maybe this is just an entry point for him to control another. And we do see inside of the area for the weird people that have been brought into, maybe this is similar to the rock throwing situation, in which it's saying, okay, there's these four characters who are standing here that seem completely out of place.
Right.
We've got Leo, we've got Bobby, we've got Briggs, and we've got Ed, and they're all standing all four together. It makes me almost question whether or not we might want to keep an eye out for them as a potential Bob candidate. That's where my brain is somewhat going. Okay. Like it's almost like feeding us, like, pay attention to these people.
Sure. Interesting hypothesis I can't really comment on. So we get the reveal, and Cooper is basically just, like, told the answer. He hears Leland, like, say the literal same phrase that was said in the Red Room dream, that, this gum is going to come back in style. The Gummulex is going to come back in style. It's so, like, obvious and direct, and everything freezes. I like the visual effect of everything freezing the way it does.
Yeah.
It's a cool looking moment.
Yeah.
I like the idea of it, I guess, in some regards, but it is, there's no shadow of a doubt that it's Leland with the way it's conveyed. And
my father killed me.
Yeah, you get the whisper, which again, did we need to know that? We probably could have figured that out, that maybe that's what she said.
And
I didn't need to hear it.
The one thing that I wish that they would keep away, like the one thing you don't say out loud, let the people in the audience just kind of make the connection themselves, is the fantastic scene in which the man from another place is dancing away, very similar to how we correlate things such as Leland dancing away. That seemed like...
And this episode just spills it out on us. And again, if we're looking at this episode as kind of cynical or jaded or just kind of in bad spirits, it doesn't seem to put a lot of faith in the viewer.
No, instead, I think that you said it best beforehand, is that whenever it comes to a mystery, and especially smaller mysteries or connections to mystery, the payoff has to be better.
And the payoff was better until this episode.
Yeah.
I think the last two before this were spectacular.
Yeah.
So I want to again emphasize, I'm not taking the side that the killer shouldn't have been revealed. I think the killer being revealed when it was, and it being Leland, was phenomenal. It made for one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. I really do enjoy. I think it was episode 14 where you get the killer reveal. So I have no qualms with that episode at all. I love it. It's the fact that you killed this excellent character and plot line with Leland, and the way you killed it was to cram what should have been individual pieces of evidence over the next few episodes into one moment, told so blatantly to you that it just kind of assumes you can't figure anything out for yourself, which... If we're talking about the show being a hodgepodge of different elements, the murder mystery part of this just kind of is a crapshoot in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I do like, though, is the way that Cooper, announces that it's Benjamin Horne who's going to be arrested. Leland needs to go there as the lawyer to do like a trick to get Leland to go with, whisper it over in Truman's ear, and then they suddenly kind of ambush him and throw him into the room.
Yeah.
I like that. That was a good moment.
Yeah, I think that it was a good moment. I think that having him blow up immediately, though...
No, there's a lot of problems here, but I'm just saying that idea in a better situation, good.
Yeah.
I like that that's the way they trick him.
Yes.
But then Leland goes into the room and starts making monkey noises and throwing himself against the wall.
I mean, I appreciate the fun in that, but...
It is fun. It does show... Again, okay, all our criticisms aside, if you take one positive thing from this listener... the actors, Ray Wise and Al Strobel, who plays Mike/Philip Gerard, are fantastic.
Yeah.
And honestly, they're the best part of this episode, because despite the fact that some of the things that Ray Wise is forced to say and do in this episode might come across negatively to us, the performance of it is deliciously diabolical. And again, in a better context, it'd be thoroughly enjoyable. Mm-hmm. He puts everything into it, and he just embodies that character so wonderfully, especially considering that we had like 13 episodes of this guy is just a sad dad. And now he's a mad dad. And now he's a dead dad. But, before that happens, he goes and throws his little tantrum in the room. And Cooper just spills all the beans about all the different clues that we saw. And at this point, Leland's acting like, and we made this comparison a lot last time, but super Jack Nance. Like super The Shining Jack Nance kind of character.
Yeah.
And I mean, we talked about this before, but like this is clearly, like, if not a direct inspiration from did I say Jack Nance? I meant Jack Torrance. Jack Torrance, the guy who's the character in The Shining.
Yeah.
Not Jack Nance, who's Pete Martell's actor. He's not channeling Pete Martell. Sorry about that. Sorry,
Come
too
on,
many Jacks.
Benji.
Too many Jacks. No, he's channeling a Torrance vibe. God almighty. But yeah, he definitely has that Jack Nicholson kind of character mannerisms, and I think they work well here. I think it's very, very good. Then he has that dig at Cooper. I have this thing for knives, just like what happened to you in Pittsburgh that time. Again, there are more mysteries still in the show.
Yeah, and in the end, there's just... That means that this was somewhat related with Bob specifically. Otherwise, why would Bob know this information?
And one thing that actually is treated with ambiguity in this episode, and thank God it is, because we get something to still think about, is that when Cooper asks Leland, when Cooper asks Bob, does Leland know what he's done? Bob says that Leland is a babe in the woods with a huge hole in his conscience. And then when Bob leaves, he's going to basically rip that plug out, and Leland will remember everything.
And that is a fantastic sort of thing just to explore, if you will, with this strange entity that is able to repress these memories and then just, when he needs to, pop it back out. I think that... I know a lot of mystery is still within Twin Peaks, but it came into question on the mystery of Laura Palmer.
Right.
And as far as anything with Laura Palmer, other than, like I said before, big manipulator, most of Laura Palmer's mystery has now been set forward to us in this episode. Mm-hmm. So... we have other mysteries to take care of, and I'm excited for those.
I like that there's still ambiguity between how much of this is Leland and how much this is Bob. Even the wording of it, while it definitely implies that Bob is in control, that doesn't necessarily actually mean that fully.
Yeah.
Because all we know is that Leland pushes back the memories. That doesn't mean Leland's not complicit in that he could still be, it's still his will doing it, but he forgets after he does it. That doesn't mean he's out of the woods, so to speak.
But there's also this very nice last bit of words with Leland in which the ripcord is taken out after Bob has slammed his head onto the metal door until Leland begins to bleed out. And he is just a sad dad thinking he's very much a bad dad, just bleeding on the floor before dead dad.
Yeah. And
it looks like he's genuinely very distraught. It is the familiar Leland we saw when Laura had died. And there is this sweet moment inside of all this towering bits of rain through the sprinklers where Cooper, surprisingly, you'd expect a lot of shows or series to kind of go like, don't go out, don't go towards the light, stay with us. But no, he is letting Leland, after everything he struggled with, after realizing what this creature had led him to do, he's saying that this is now your time to rest.
And I think we want to put a pin in this conversation as much as we can, because as we continue to learn more about Bob and maybe speculate more on Leland's culpability, you know, if Leland is even like 20% aware of what was going on when it happened, how effective is a deathbed confession very conveniently at the very end of your life after all the harm he's caused of killing at least 3 young women? I think we need to kind of look at, as time goes on, where we sit as far as Leland's morality here and what Leland did. It does seem genuine. I do agree with you here. He refers to Laura and the light as basically being an angel figure. He remembers being a young boy, seeing Bob in his dreams, and Bob saying he wanted to play with him, and it says he opened me and I invited him and he came inside me. And again, very sexual tones. And again, if we're looking at the idea that this is a situation where Bob inhabits Leland as a form of like a predator, both sexually and also in terms of like murder, we do get there's some sort of sense in which Leland as a child was a victim, and that cycle of being a victim really, no matter what Bob is, it had really strong ramifications for him later. I don't know. The language of it's interesting. He admits to killing Teresa Banks, which I think a casual like Twin Peaks fan is probably like, wait, who? Because that was not been talked about at all basically since the pilot.
Yep.
But we'll get there eventually. There is more on that stuff later. But he admits to killing Teresa Banks, and he goes out in some form of peace, one could say.
Well, I imagine like we had been told about the other letter before, so
yeah. And then we get that scene where it's Cooper, Albert, Sheriff Truman walking on the path where Major Briggs is ahead of them.
Yeah, Major Briggs, this large plastic man.
Could you elaborate on why he's made of plastic?
The light, everything in this episode, like, there's something strange, and I don't know how I feel about it. Through the episodes, we've been having these weird, like, angles.
Sure.
That are bringing up, like, you can, I think that there's this movie called Battlefield Earth in which, like, the camera is tilted for a lot of it. There's a lot of shots in this episode where the camera is tilted.
Kind of Dutch angles.
Yeah, I don't think the Dutch angles really worked in this episode.
Yeah.
I think that, overall, it brought me out.
Your man Tim Hunter failed you in that regard.
A little bit. And there's these moments with Briggs, in which is also strange, in which I'm wondering why Briggs is here and there.
And he quotes like Shakespeare. I think he quotes, and I'm not going to look it up right now. I'm pretty sure this is Horatio from Hamlet. He says, "There's more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophy." No, it's just Hamlet. It's Hamlet to Horatio. Yep, I'm pretty sure of that. And he quotes Hamlet either way. which I kind of assume there's two people who quote Shakespeare in this show, Major Briggs and Benjamin Horn.
Yeah. But Briggs is just standing
He's
there.
just kind of standing there,
in the middle of the woods where
Yeah.
Cooper, Truman, as well as Hawk also walk up to, and it's almost as if he's kind of waiting there,
Yeah.
and the light hits him just right in this single colored suit, in which I'm like, is that man real? Oh, it's Briggs. It's Briggs.
I never questioned his reality, but that's interesting to think about. And then you get the neutered form of Albert and the neutered form of Truman having a legitimately interesting conversation, but it's also kind of, I'm mixed about this, and this is a genuine mix. It's not me saying mix just to hate on it. I'm also really curious, I like the questions that are being asked about the nature of Bob, but I also at the same time don't like the way it's being presented. Here, audience, think about this. These are your options. It's a little too heavy-handed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do like that we're given multiple points of view in this sort of Socratic mini debate that happens here. I just think that it may not have been executed as good as it could have been, which, but it's still not a bad idea, because you have the conflicting ideas that, Briggs says, an evil that is this great in the world, does it really matter what the cause is? And Truman, Cooper says, yes, because it's our job to stop it. So there's this idea that maybe we do have to know the source, or maybe it doesn't even matter at this point. And for Truman, who's having trouble believing in the spirit of Bob, Cooper just has simply to say, would you rather believe that this adult man, I don't want to say the R word on podcast just in case that is, bothersome to people, or potentially an issue with where this podcast airs, but who took advantage of his daughter and murdered her. Would you rather believe that a guy just did that, or would you rather believe in the spirit? Which I think is interesting for Cooper to say that, because he basically admits that, hey, if you don't believe it, what do you choose to believe?
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting approach to faith and to belief in general. And then you get Albert out of nowhere just philosophizing that Bob is the evil that men do.
That's the thing. I would imagine what would have been far better. I wanted a little Albert in this. And I think that, Albert pushing a sense of reality onto Truman, saying that this is, in this case, is well, what do you want? Do you want this or that? And then Cooper being the one philosophizing that it's the evil man.
Or even Major Briggs, honestly.
Either person, it seems more fitting otherwise.
Yeah, it's very strange. I know some people have, again, said that Major Briggs is kind of the stand-in for Mark Frost. I'm not sure how much I do believe that. If that is the case, this was an episode partly written by Mark Frost. If we do take that idea that Mark Frost is Major Briggs, then the Mark Frost character is the one who questions why we need to even know the answer. All that matters is that it's evil, which I find strange if that is Mark Frost's actual position, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's complexity to Albert's portrayal in the past, where he is incredibly insensitive with his verbal comments. Well, verbal comments, I guess, as opposed to written. I don't know what I even mean by that. He's very...
It's rather passe text he sends.
He's very aggressive with the way he speaks, but ultimately he's a person who pursues peace. I'm dying. He pursues peace in a sense of rationality, in a scientific sort of way. He doesn't want to get misled by fear. And I think that makes sense for him. So for him to come out here and act the way he does in this episode, you're right. I initially said that maybe it's a good thing Albert's back, but you're right. This is the worst we've seen of Albert.
Yeah.
It's the most watered down.
I am expecting, everything is just strange. It's moving at a weird pace. Again, dream logic. I'm just waiting for people to wake up the next day.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ben might wake up still in a jail cell. We're not really sure. We're not really sure what his fate is.
Leland... It was the one who admitted to being the killer, but he also died in the jail cell. I don't know how far the testimonies of the sheriff saying, yeah, that guy said it, and he banged his head a whole bunch of times against the wall, or whether or not Truman will be caught into question, or those inside of the police station.
Well, in Catherine, it sounds like in exchange for the rights to the mill and to Ghostwood, she will, testify in his behalf. She will corroborate.
No, because Catherine... Sure, she says things, but she could have said hapty-dapty-doo, and the result would have still been the same. There's this fun scene where Tojimura comes into the jail cell.
Yeah, that's the scene I'm talking about, yeah.
Ben is just kind of sitting aside, just being his sad Ben self at the moment.
Yeah,
and
a has-been, so to speak.
And when Ben sees Tojimura, he still tries to be his professional self the best to his ability, and says that he's simply incarcerated inside here. Like, he can't do anything about the mill. Not the mill, the Ghostwood Project.
Well, both, really.
Well, yes, but still, he's more so focusing Ghostwood Project on Tojimura. He can't do much with giving back the money that Tojimura had given him, so he is just here. And he actually says in his very poetic Ben way about how he feels about his entire situation. Meanwhile,
It's the long, dark night of my soul.
Yep. And the Catherine just goes ahead, just during this, just stops listening, lifts her foot out of her shoe, and just puts it right in front of his face. And there Ben goes, on his knees, kissing her feet.
I do like that callback that he would recognize her toes. I like that.
It's great. And the fact is that even when Catherine is on top at the moment, and even if, like, this is just basically saying, yep, go ahead, bend down, kiss my feet. Like, Ben seems all for it at first. Like, he is just so thankful, so happy that Catherine would be here.
Well, and he said in a heartbeat he will sign it over.
And he did. He did. Had papers handed, he signed it, and then he hands it back.
I kind of like that about Ben, though, is that after all the work he's put into this, he is so ready to just basically throw in the towel and be like, hey, I'm dead. I need to get out of the situation. I'd much rather just swallow my pride, kiss the toes, give you everything you want. Just get me out of here. I can't be in this jail cell.
And then when Catherine gets the papers and she's walking away, he's like, hey, you're going to tell the sheriff, right? She's like, we've been lying our whole adult lives. Why would we start changing that now?
Right.
And
it's a great line. It's a great line.
That's definitely something.
Well, and I also like that before she even says that, you know, Ben's over here complimenting her disguise, saying how clever it is. It reminded me a lot of how he complimented Josie when Josie started taking more action. And it's hard to know with Ben whether or not he's complimenting these women who are in verbal battles with him because he wants to, like, soften them up and it's kind of manipulative, or whether he genuinely is respecting the game. He's like, hey, as someone who's a liar and manipulator, I respect what you're doing here. The Ben in my heart is mostly doing the latter, but I also understand that Catherine calls him a slimy rat bastard for a reason. So it's also possible that Ben is only saying anything just to get out of this jail cell.
All I'm saying is that we don't have to put to one side or the other. We can mix it into a nice little cocktail.
And I as much negativity as we've had in this episode, I think we ended on the best part of the show.
Yeah.
I think this episode,
Ben getting screwed over,
is the best part of the show in this episode.
Yeah.
Which, you know, it doesn't take that much time on the screen time, so that's kind of concerning, but it is good.
Yeah, and now Catherine has the power.
So I guess before we wrap up here, I want us to just, in brief, summarize for clarity what we think were the main issues with this episode, like just in brief. Not to recap necessarily, but to just put in, like, now that we've said everything, why didn't we enjoy this episode very much?
The overall tone of it, while I can have some respect for it, I go back to my comment before. This episode feels like either frustration or the acknowledgement of a path the show is going to take. And that is crumpling up a plot, throwing it away, and starting anew with a fresh sheet. In this case, it's Bob no longer needs this matter with Laura, Leland, and everything. Bob's going on somewhere else on whatever is on this new canvas. And that is where, at least the execution of it, from what I've seen, is poor in my eyes. And it's only going to be dependent on the following episodes on whether or not they will be able to change my mind on this. Because there was a lot of excitement, a lot of potential, a lot of good buildup that a killer that we know is out there within this man we've seen as innocent. And though he is still out there, and yes, could be within anyone, that was hardly a focus in this episode or something built up with that anticipation. Instead, it is the closing arc for Leland, who now must go, and now I am left with not sure where are we going from here. So it's like you have to eat the cake. It's not have your cake and leave it too. You're just told, eat this cake. And then after the cake is gone, it's sad that you can't even really do much about it.
To add on to that, some other points we've noted throughout the episode, certain characters, especially like Albert and Sheriff Truman, they don't necessarily act in an intriguing way. Instead of characters standing out as being different viewpoints from each other, they often feel arbitrary. I mean, the episode's called Arbitrary Law. I think the most arbitrary thing is how some of these characters were used in this episode. Burn! But just the fact that, like, it feels like they're all mouthpieces to move the story forward. It's so transparently clear that the stuff in the roadhouse where they all were gathered together was just, we need to reveal the killer somehow. Let's just put these people in a room and just Cooper's just gonna remember. And that's just what they did. They used James and Donna to just, like, weakly push forward this episode without actually giving them a chance to really mourn their friend. It just feels like a lot of the stuff that was meant for maybe humor didn't really work, and tonally it just wasn't very strong. There weren't a lot of memorable moments. I'd say really the only really just untainted one was Ben and Catherine, but even then, while it was a good scene, that shouldn't be the highlight of this episode, given that we even had a better scene involving Ben and Pete, I would say, the episode before. I think it also is concerning that they killed off Leland, who had such an interesting dynamic for the show, that we could have spent more time knowing about Bob while the Bookhouse Boys and the sheriff and the FBI don't. And it could have been this game of who's going to find out Bob first. You know, what if someone who's actually nefarious in their own way finds out about Bob before the police do? Like, there's so many different ways that could be handled. We could have had a really interesting dynamic of kind of a dark other protagonist in Leland. We could have saw the show from a different lens, knowing what Leland knows a little bit more. But that opportunity was swiftly squandered. And it's just kind of sad because in the grand scheme, I wish that they hadn't killed him off the way they did. I wish that they would have continued the momentum instead of just slamming the momentum down. And even if I accepted the fact that they're going to kill Leland, the execution in this episode wasn't good. Like, even if I just take the idea, okay, they were going to kill Leland in this episode, that has to stay the same.
Yeah.
Okay, you could still make a good episode out of that, even if I wouldn't agree with the overall direction of the show. You could still make a good episode about that. But the way in which Cooper found out it was Leland, the way in which the characters acted to push forward exposition, it really felt uninspired, is the word I would use. But after all the times it made clear that, you know, Maddie's killer was Laura's killer, are you, Professor, finally convinced that the killer of Laura Palmer is Leland as possessed by Bob?
This episode spelled it out more than anything.
So at this point, let's put a nail in that coffin.
Yep.
Let's send that.
Let's send it down the river
to Missoula, Montana.
Do we have any rivers that go to Missoula? In fact,
I'm sure we have many.
In fact, from Twin Peaks, can we get to Missoula, Montana via river?
Listeners, if you've stuck with us this entire time, thank you for your patience. Let us know your thoughts on this episode, or, you know, if you actually know if there's a river that leads from Twin Peaks, Washington, the Snoqualmie Falls area, to somewhere in Missoula, Montana. Let us know. Let us know if there's a river near you that... Actually, don't. That's kind of creepy. Don't let us know where you live, please. Don't let us know where you live, please. Then let's end this episode on... I should probably say where you contact us. You can email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com. And you can tweet at us via the Twitter handle snakeeyedreams1. The numeral 1, as in the loneliest number. Let's end this episode on a different question then. And we'll see how much we want to keep asking this as time goes on. But instead of asking who killed Laura Palmer then, let us ask instead a question about another entity of choice. One who may in fact be roaming the woods right now, seeing owls in the purple-hued light. Who is the son of Robert?
Now, I'm sure that we'll get some options from good old Bob, but I'm going to go back to my statement beforehand that we have 4 people standing next to each other that seem just out of place in the roadhouse. But at least 3 or 4 of them, with one possibly, we can assume, to be mentally susceptible, would be with Briggs being the one that would be the least likely. But we've got Ed, Bob, and Bobby.
Bobby. Would that be too on the
And
nose?
Leo.
Would that be too on the nose if Bobby was Bob?
I think that there would be a bit of extra humor on that. So, hey. As far as the biggest candidate, Leo, because he is currently indisposed, as far as we know. Mm-hmm. And if we had that horror element of someone who seems to be wheelchair bound also coming up and being puppeted by Bob, that'd be fun. Bobby is already kind of parasitic by nature, so Parasite working with Parasite would be interesting. Ed needs all the help he can get with Nadine. So maybe Bob will come to offer him some help in his dreams. And Briggs, wouldn't it be interesting? I know you've seen the series, but wouldn't it be interesting to have someone who now is suddenly just appearing in the plot to now also try to help Cooper out, but also be working for the other team, if you will? So, those are my candidates, Leo being the most likely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. Let us hope that we will be feeling positive emotions on high in blue tomorrows. That's a sick Inland Empire reference for all you rabbits out there. Yeah, all you red light bulbs out there. All you red light bulbs shining bright in the night. Gonna go